Reading from Dreams, Evolution, and Value Fulfillment by Jane Roberts, a Seth book. So we are still in master events and reality overlays. However, this is technically, as Rob puts it, not dictation for the book Dreams, but this is kind of like a sidling type session 922, that I'm really eager to record and have you guys hear. Unfortunately, it's not fluid with what this chapter is about, but it does talk about value fulfillment and some other very interesting things that kind of, make you think about the schizophrenic chapters, where are you schizophrenic, or are you really just tapping into something more profound within you, someone or a personality that is a part of you, like Seth is to Jane. Anyways, so this, I just have to read this. So Rob's notes, pre-session notes. Starting with, I'm not going to read it all, but starting with, Seth had told us that our work is, quote, protected. And I've been curious about that statement ever since and mentioned it to Jane today. So dictation starts. It is dictation, but not necessarily dreams, for dreams, this book. But it fits well into dreams, even though it's not book dictation. That's a quote from Rob. So Seth comes in. He says, "Now, you are protected. Your work is protected. Some years ago, Rupert had an experience in which he glimpsed in the center of his living room a strange form. He sensed that the form was composed of energy that was definitely predisposed to come to his assistance, or to do his bidding. He also realized that, at least to some extent, this energy had accumulated as a result of his own good intentions and his desire to help others. He called this, quote, helper, and he never saw the form clearly again. The form represented the personified, accumulated positive energies that were working to his advantage at that time, that provided him protection, but that also automatically worked to the benefit of his life and projects. The very idea of protection, however, as you know, implies a threat. So if you believe in threats, you had better have protection. It was not necessary for Rupert to see the form again, merely to sense the reality of that powerful energy and realize that it worked on his behalf. In a fashion, the form also represented the innocent and powerful inner self, or spontaneous self, or naturally magical self. The terms are synonymous. Rupert knew that helper could be sent out to others to their advantage, and in that regard the form stood for the great power of natural positive desire and thought patterns. Now Seth's addressing Rob. He says, "You have the same kind of, quote, form. These represent the greater source selves out of which your present persons spring. I told you that you possessed far more knowledge about your own lives and the lives of others than you were intellectually aware of. You act on that knowledge, for one thing, when you are born physically, when you grow. The squirrel acts on that kind of knowledge when it buries nuts, as you saw, again, on a recent TV program. And the squirrel's greater knowledge includes the knowledge of its species as well. Helper represents the part that possesses such knowledge. In practical terms, it is very important to understand that such knowledge and protection do exist, that all of your problems need not be solved through conscious reasoning alone, and indeed, few problems can be solved exclusively in that fashion. Your work is protected not only because it is one of your projects, but also because in a fashion it becomes its own kind of entity, a well-intended one that exists in a rather concentrated form, distilled from your own best aspirations. Hence, it is also filled with energy, and also becomes a collector of it. I do not want to become involved in a confusion of terms. The mind's powers are far greater than those generally assigned to rational thought alone. As per our last private sessions, rational reasoning overdone can, for example, actually limit practical use of the intellect's faculties and therefore serve to dim some of the mind's scope. In a fashion, again, helper represents the true capacity of the mind's functioning, the kind of instant comprehension that is behind both the intuitions and the intellect's activities. You are dealing, then, with the spacious intellect, the knower. The knower, Knower, is instantly aware of all your needs, and is the portion of the universe that is personally disposed in your direction, because its energies form your own person. That protection always couches your existence. It means that you live, quote, in a state of grace, end quote. You can be unaware of that state. You can deny it or refuse it, but you are within it regardless. It forms the very fabric of your individual beings. Value fulfillment means that each individual, each entity of whatever nature, spontaneously, automatically seeks those conditions that are suited to its own fulfillment and to the fulfillment of others. In the most basic of terms, no one's fulfillment can be achieved at the expense of another's. Fulfillment does not happen that way. Your very lives seek the best direction for fulfillment. Our work seeks its own best directions for fulfillment. When you realize this, then you can accept seeming setbacks or seeming contradictions with a calm, detached air, realizing that such factors appear as they do only in the light of your present intellectual knowledge, a knowledge that must be limited to current events, and that in the larger picture, known to you at other levels, such seeming contradictions or seemingly unfortunate situations or whatever will be seen to be to your advantage. You do not have all the facts, you see, at the intellectual level. So if you base all of your judgments at that level alone, then you can be quite short-sighted. We are dealing with the psychology of experience, however, so you yourselves alter the situation according to your own reactions. If you feel threatened by certain situations and lacking protection, then you will take certain steps that might not be taken otherwise. So your actions are vastly different according to whether or not you realize that you are indeed being protected. If you build up feelings of threat, then at your level you also react to those. The protection exists, but in such cases you do not allow yourselves to take full advantage of it. Okay, so they're actually taking a break, and Rob and Jane are talking about, they're just having a little discussion. Rob's mentioning Cro-Magnon man, and how he's the same species, Homo sapien, as modern man. And so Seth comes back, and this is what he says. Propos of one of your brief discussions. The ideas for inventions, tools, or products exist mentally, to be brought into activation whenever they are required, say, by circumstances or by the environment. Various tribes in different parts of the earth would suddenly begin using new tools, say, not because there might be any physical communication among them or cultural exchanges, but because separate conditions in their own environments triggered mental processes that activated the particular images of the tools required for a given job at hand. The information which was non-physical was then transformed into practical knowledge either from inner visual imagery by itself or through the state of dreaming. Dreams have always served as such a connective. You know more about your life than you think you do, and far more about your life and society than you are intellectually aware of. Early man was in that same position, and his inventions, his tools, his artistry, and so forth came into being from the inner, ever-present realm of the mind, triggered by his unconscious but quite real estimation of his position within the universe at large, and in regard to his own environment. In a fashion, and forgive me for using one of my favorite qualifications again, but in a fashion, cultures do not evolve in the kind of straightforward manner that is usually supposed. Of course, cultures change, but man instantly began to fashion culture, as, for example, beavers instantly began to form dams. They did not learn how to form dams through trial and error. They did not, for untold centuries, build faulty dams, for example. They were born or created dam makers. Man automatically began to form culture. He did not start with the rudiments of culture, as is thought. He did not learn through trial and error to think clear thoughts. He thought quite clearly from the beginning. He did learn through trial and error various ways of best translating those thoughts into physical action. The first cultures were as rich as your own. In your terms, reading and writing are great advantages, but it is also true that in the past the mind was also used to record information and transmit it with an artistry that you do not now use. Memory was so perfected that men at one time were indeed living histories and carried within their minds their genealogies and backgrounds and the knowledge of their peoples, which were then passed on to their children. It is true that reading and writing have certain advantages over such procedures, but it is also true that knowledge possessed in that old fashion became a part of a man and a society in a much more personal, meaningful manner. It was, of course, a different kind of knowing. At its best, it did not lead to rote renditions of remembered material, but to dramatic renderings of it through music, poetry, dancing. In other words, its rendition was accompanied by creative physical expression. It is true that, practically speaking, a man's mind or a woman's could not hold all of the information available now in your world, but much of that information does not deal with basic knowledge about the universe or man's place within it. It is a kind of secondary information, interesting, but not life-giving. Man did not have to learn by trial and error what plants were beneficial to eat and what herbs were good for healing. The knower in him knew that, and he acted on the information spontaneously. The knower is, of course, always present, but the part of your culture that is built upon the notion that no such inner knowledge exists and those foolish ideas of rational thought as the only provider of answers, therefore often limit your own use of inner abilities. You will end up with, if all goes well, a kind of, quote, new illuminated consciousness. An intellect who realizes that the source of its own light is not itself, but comes from the spontaneous power that provides the fuel for its thoughts. So that's the end of this session. And session notes, number 1, gives a description of where helper, Jane's helper, comes from, and it's in Adventures in Consciousness, Jane's book, which is an excellent book, and Jane sends helper out to help people. It explains that on the next page. And then session note number 3, among others, in The Nature of Personal Reality, a Seth book, see Chapter 9. Seth discusses the state of grace, natural guilt, artificial guilt, and related subjects. And just so you all know, the next session, 928, is obviously a major skip. We're going from 922 to 928. So obviously they're getting some personal sessions, some information for the Magical Approach book. But in the next video, it will be session 928. It will go back into master events and how they emerge. And for those of you who are interested, this is literally the room I was reading in. This is my husband's toy room. It is a special room for lots of reasons. Got some crazy stuff in here. My husband made this from an old, oh, scary. My husband's made a lot of this stuff. He's awesome. Here's one of his coolest creations. Supreme Leader Snoke. This guy is 37 inches tall. He just hangs out. He's like a family member of ours. Very cool. We actually did some 3D replicas of his head. Sold them on eBay as toys. But we're not just into skulls, guts, and gore. I say we, I mean he. And of course Star Wars. But minerals and other really neat things like that. If you don't know who Pusshead is, look him up. Customs right there. Those two, that 2-pack right there in the middle, my husband made. Can't really see it. He made that. That's a 3D Disney Mickey, creepy. Well, he painted it anyway. I sealed it. Like I said, he's awesome. I have my own creations. Seth inspired, but they are not downstairs in these. They are not downstairs in this room. And there's our dark crystal toys that we love. You don't know this, dark crystal, the special man that made dark crystal said everybody has to read the Seth material in order to understand what we're doing, what this movie is about. Really cool. Anyway,